She hired a one-night escort, not knowing he was a billionaire in hiding. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. She never imagined her life would narrow down to a single decision made at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. The rain had been falling for hours, steady and unforgiving, tapping against the window of her small apartment like a reminder she could not silence. The room smelled faintly of cold coffee and damp laundry. The air felt heavy. Her phone rested in her hand, screen glowing, thumb hovering as if it did not belong to her. This was not desperation, she told herself. It was control. For once, her name was Claire Morgan, 32 years old, exhausted in a way sleep never fixed. 3 weeks earlier, she had walked out of a glass office tower with a cardboard box in her arms and a forced smile on her face, after being told her position was being restructured. 2 nights after that, she learned the man she had planned a future with had already planned one without her. Since then, silence had become her loudest companion. Claire did not want romance. She did not want promises. She wanted one night where she did not have to explain herself, justify her pain, or pretend she was fine. One night where expectations were clear and emotions were not required. That was how she found herself scrolling through a discreet website she had sworn she would never open. Professional. Confidential. No judgment. Her eyes skimmed faces and descriptions, all of them polished, all of them distant, until she stopped. His profile photo was simple. No forced smile. No flashy background. Just a man in a plain black jacket, dark hair slightly out of place, eyes calm, almost unreadable. The description was short, respectful, boundaries clearly stated. Something about that unsettled her. She hesitated longer than she meant to. Then she clicked. The confirmation message came almost immediately. Polite, direct, no unnecessary questions. He would arrive at midnight. Cash only. One night, Claire set her phone down and exhaled, pressing her palms against the kitchen counter as if to steady herself. This was transactional. Safe. Clean, at least. That was what she believed. Across the city, in a quiet hotel room far above the traffic, the man known on that screen as an escort stood by the window, looking down at streets he technically owned pieces of. His real name was Alexander Reed. To the public, he was a billionaire chief executive officer whose decisions moved markets and headlines. Tonight, he was none of that. He loosened the collar of his plain white shirt and checked his reflection, making sure there was nothing about him that suggested power or wealth. No watch, no cufflinks, no trace of the life he had learned to hide well. This was not a whim. It never was. After years of being desired for his money, his influence, his last name, Alexander had grown tired of wondering whether anyone saw the man beneath it all. So he disappeared from his world for a while, stepping into carefully chosen shadows where people treated him as disposable, temporary, replaceable. This meeting was part of that escape. A controlled experiment, he told himself. Nothing more. Back in her apartment, Claire opened the door when the knock came, sharp and precise. The man standing there did not look like what she expected. He was taller than she imagined, shoulders relaxed, posture unassuming. His voice, when he spoke, was low and calm, not practiced. "Claire?" he asked. She nodded, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was beating. "Yes. Come in." Neither of them knew it yet, but the moment he stepped inside, something shifted. What was meant to be a simple exchange had already begun to unravel, quietly, irreversibly, setting into motion a truth neither of them was prepared to face. The door closed softly behind him, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Claire stood a few feet away, arms folded loosely, as if holding herself together. The clock on the microwave read 12:02. Midnight had already passed, and with it, the version of the night she thought she understood. She cleared her throat first. "You can sit if you want." He nodded once, slow and respectful, and took a seat on the edge of the couch, leaving space between them. He did not look around her apartment the way other men had before. He did not judge the second-hand furniture or the stack of unopened mail on the counter. He simply waited. That unsettled her more than anything else. "This is strange," Claire said, forcing a small laugh that did not quite land. "I mean, I know what this is supposed to be, but I feel like I should apologize anyway." "You do not need to," he replied. His voice was calm even, without the hint of expectation. "We agreed on the terms. I am here to listen first." "Listen." The word caught her off guard. She turned away, walking to the window as rain streaked down the glass, blurring the city lights below. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then the words began to spill out, quietly at first, then faster. "I did not lose my job because I was bad at it," she said. "I worked late. I covered for other people. I gave that place 5 years of my life, and they let me go with a smile in a box like it meant nothing." He did not interrupt. "And then there was Mark," she continued, her voice tightening at the name. 6 years. Plans. Talks about a house. And I found out I was the only one taking those plans seriously." She turned back to face him, eyes sharp now. "I did not hire you because I wanted to feel wanted. I hired you because I was tired of being invisible." Something shifted in his expression, subtle but real. Across from her, Alexander felt a familiar pull in his chest. He had heard confessions before, many of them, but this was different. There was no performance in her pain, no attempt to impress or manipulate, just exhaustion. "You are not invisible," he said. Before he could stop himself, Claire let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but her eyes glistened. "You do not know that?" "No," he admitted. "But I know what it feels like to be seen only for what you provide." That gave her pause. She studied him more closely now, the plain jacket, the steady hands, the way he met her gaze without pushing. This was not what she expected when she made the booking. "What made you choose this work?" she asked cautiously. He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "For a long time, people expected things from me before they ever asked who I was. This lets me meet people without expectations." That was not a lie, just not the whole truth. Claire nodded slowly, absorbing that. She moved back toward the couch but sat in the armchair instead, keeping a comfortable distance. "There are boundaries," she said, suddenly firm. "I need that to be clear." "Of course," he replied immediately. "Anything you are not comfortable with does not happen. Die sind seven." She searched his face, as if testing whether he meant it. When she seemed satisfied, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Then I guess," she said softly, "we can just talk." Minutes passed. Then more. They talked about small things at first. Her favorite diner that stayed open all night. His supposed travels that were vague enough to be true. The conversation ebbed and flowed, natural and unforced. At some point, Claire realized she had stopped watching the clock, and Alexander realized something far more dangerous. This night was no longer just an escape. It was becoming something that would be very hard to walk away from. The conversation slowed as the rain outside softened into a distant whisper. At some point, Claire stood and moved toward the kitchen, more out of habit than intention. She poured water into 2 mismatched glasses, then hesitated, before adding ice to his as well. It felt strangely domestic for a night that was never meant to feel real. When she handed him the glass, their fingers brushed briefly. She pulled back first. "Sorry," she said automatically. "You do not need to apologize," Alexander replied, again. That word followed her through the night. Need. She sat back down, this time closer. though still careful. Her voice dropped, losing the edge it had carried earlier. "I used to think I knew what my life was supposed to look like," she said. "College, career, relationship, all in neat steps. I did everything right, or at least I thought I did. And now?" he asked. "Now I feel like I missed something important, like everyone else got a rule book I never saw." Alexander listened, hands resting loosely on his knees. He was used to rooms where people waited for him to speak, to lead, to decide. Here, his role was to stay still and let her fill the silence. It felt unfamiliar, honest. "There is a freedom in not knowing," he said quietly. "But it comes at a cost." She looked at him sharply. "You sound like you have paid it." He met her gaze. For a moment, the truth hovered on the edge of his tongue. Then he stepped back from it. "I have," he said, "in different ways." Claire nodded, accepting that answer without pressing. That, too, stayed with him. The night moved forward without them noticing. They talked about her childhood in a small town outside Columbus, about how she used to sit on the hood of her car and watch the stars because it was the only place that felt quiet. She asked about his family, and he gave careful truths. That he learned early how to be self-sufficient. That success could be loud, but loneliness was louder. She smiled at that, a sad, understanding smile. At one point, she laughed. A real laugh, surprised, as if it had escaped her without permission. The sound filled the room, warm and unexpected. Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had entered the night with rules. Observe. Do not interfere. Do not attach. Yet here he was, tracking the rise and fall of her breathing, noticing how she tucked her feet beneath herself when she felt safe, how her voice softened when she spoke about things that mattered. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Yes." "Well, do you ever get tired of pretending?" Her eyes searched his face. "Not in this job. In general." The question landed heavier than she knew. "All the time," he answered honestly. They sat in silence after that. Not awkward, just full. Eventually, Claire glanced at the clock and frowned slightly. "I forgot to be nervous," she said. "That feels important somehow." Alexander gave a faint smile. "It is. Minus. Was whinus." She studied him, really studied him, as if trying to place something that did not quite fit. Then she shook her head. "This was not what I expected," she admitted. "But I am glad you came." So was he, and that realization scared him more than any secret he was carrying, because for the first time in a long while, the mask he wore did not feel like protection. It felt like a lie that was already starting to hurt someone he did not want to lose. The night deepened quietly, without ceremony. Claire stood and dimmed the living room lamp, not to change the mood, but because the brightness suddenly felt too revealing. Shadows softened the edges of the room, and the rain outside had slowed to an occasional tap against the glass. She wrapped her arms around herself, then stopped, catching the motion. "I want to be clear," she said, steady but calm. "I do not want this to turn into something I regret tomorrow." Hess Pontact. Alexander rose from the couch, careful not to step too close. "Then, it will not." There was no hesitation in his answer, no persuasion, just certainty. That, more than anything else, made her trust him. They moved slowly, not toward each other, but toward an understanding. Shoes were left by the door, jackets folded with care. Each step felt deliberate, chosen. When they sat again, it was side by side, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to breathe. Claire rested her elbows on her knees. "It is strange," she said softly. "I thought tonight would be about forgetting. Instead, I keep remembering things." "Like what?" he asked. "Like who I was before everything became about surviving." She glanced at him. "Do you ever miss the person you were before you learned how to protect yourself?" Alexander did not answer right away. "I think about him more than I should," he said at last. "He was easier to be. Even R degraded." She nodded, As if that made perfect sense, time blurred. Midnight passed into something quieter, slower. The city outside seemed to exhale. At some point, Claire leaned her head back against the couch, eyes half closed. "I feel safe," she murmured, almost to herself. The words landed with weight. Alexander felt the familiar instinct rise in him, the one that told him to pull away before something mattered too much. Instead, he stayed where he was, letting the moment exist without trying to define it. When she shifted, turning slightly toward him, he did not move away. They talked less now. Silence filled the spaces between them. Not empty, but full of things neither of them knew how to say. When their hands touched, it was not rushed. When she rested her head against his shoulder, it felt earned, not taken. This was not part of the plan. Eventually, Claire straightened, a small crease forming between her brows. "I do not know how this is supposed to end," she admitted. "Neither do I," he said. She smiled faintly. "That might be the most honest thing anyone has said to me in a long time." The clock ticked softly. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on wet pavement. When the night finally drew to a close, it did so gently. There was no dramatic goodbye, no promises spoken aloud, just a quiet understanding that something important had happened, even if neither of them could name it yet. At the door, Claire paused. "Thank you," she said, "for treating me like a person." Alexander met her eyes, the weight of his secret pressing heavier now than ever before. "You deserve that," he replied. As he stepped into the hallway, the door closing behind him, he knew with absolute clarity that this encounter had crossed a line he had never meant to approach. And for the first time since he chose to hide who he was, Alexander Reed wondered whether the truth might come at a cost he was no longer willing to let her pay alone. Morning arrived without asking permission. Claire woke to pale gray light filtering through the blinds and the distant sound of traffic beginning its daily rhythm. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then she felt the quiet, the kind that only comes after something meaningful has passed. She sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. The apartment looked the same as it always had: the worn couch, the small dining table with one uneven leg. But the air felt different, as if the night had left a fingerprint behind. He was gone. She had expected that. Still, the realization landed heavier than she thought it would. Claire stood and walked to the kitchen, reaching automatically for the coffee maker. That was when she noticed it. On the counter, carefully placed beside her keys, was a folded piece of paper. Not money, not a receipt, just a note. She hesitated before opening it. "Thank you for trusting me. Last night mattered more than you know. No name. No number." Her throat tightened. For a second, she wondered if she had imagined the sincerity of the night. But the note was real, the handwriting steady, intentional. Whoever he truly was, he had meant what he said. She folded the paper and slipped it into the pocket of her sweater, as if afraid it might disappear if she looked at it too long. Across the city, Alexander Reed sat in the back seat of a black sedan, staring out at the skyline he usually ruled from above. The driver spoke quietly into a headset. The tablet on Alexander's lap glowed with unread messages, stock alerts, and meeting reminders he had ignored all night. None of it mattered. His mind kept returning to a small apartment, to mismatched glasses, to the way Claire had said, "I feel safe," like it was a confession. He reached into his coat pocket and felt the edge of something he should not have kept. A small, folded napkin she had absent-mindedly written on while talking. A diner address, a memory she had shared without knowing it would become a tether. This was not supposed to happen. The entire purpose of disappearing was distance, control, protection, and yet, for the first time in years, he felt exposed in a way money could not shield. Back at her apartment, Claire dressed for another day of uncertainty. Job applications, emails that would likely go unanswered, life moving forward whether she was ready or not. She paused at the mirror, studying her reflection. She did not look different. But she felt steadier. Someone had listened, truly listened, without trying to fix her, without trying to buy her. That mattered. As she left, she hesitated, then turned back and picked up the note once more. She tucked it carefully into her bag, next to her resume. It felt strange, carrying proof that one honest night could exist without strings attached. Alexander stood later that morning in a glass conference room high above the city, surrounded by executives who waited for his direction. His voice was calm, decisive, unchanged. To them, nothing had shifted. But inside, something had cracked open. He thought of Claire walking into her day, unaware of who he truly was, unaware of the power he carried. And for the first time, he questioned whether revealing the truth would destroy the only thing that had felt real in a very long time. Both of them moved forward that day, believing the night was over. Neither of them knew it was only the beginning. The days that followed settled into a quiet pattern, but the quiet did not bring peace. Claire sent out resumes in the mornings and walked the city in the afternoons, filling time she could not afford to waste. Coffee shops became temporary offices. Public libraries became places to breathe. Still, her thoughts kept drifting back to one night she had told herself was meant to be forgettable. She tried to dismiss it. People met. Moments passed. Life moved on. But every time her phone buzzed, her heart reacted before her mind could catch up. Nothing came. No message. No explanation. Just the note, folded and refolded so many times the paper had softened at the edges. She told herself that was enough, that it had been real because it had ended cleanly. And yet, some nights, she replayed the way he listened, the way he never once made her feel small. Across the city, Alexander Reed found it impossible to return to the life he had paused. Meetings blurred together. Conversations felt hollow. People spoke to him with the same careful reverence they always had, and for the first time, it grated on him. None of them knew the version of himself that sat on a worn couch in a small apartment, holding a glass of water and staying silent, because silence was what someone needed. He had walked away from Claire with every intention of protecting her from the truth. But the truth refused to stay quiet. Late one night, alone in his penthouse, Alexander opened his laptop and pulled up a private file. He had not planned to use it. He had promised himself boundaries. Still, his fingers hovered, then moved. Claire Morgan. The screen filled with information he immediately regretted seeing. Employment history, education, the address he already knew by heart. He closed the file quickly, chest tight. This was not curiosity. This was intrusion. Yet the damage was done. He knew enough now to understand how fragile her footing was, how close she was to slipping through the cracks she joked about but feared deeply. The next morning, Claire received an email she almost deleted. The subject line read, "Interview opportunity." She opened it cautiously. A mid-sized non-profit consulting firm had reviewed her resume and wanted to speak with her. No explanation, no referral listed, just an invitation. Her first instinct was suspicion. The second was hope. She attended the interview 2 days later. It went smoothly. Too smoothly. The questions were thoughtful, the atmosphere respectful. When she left, she felt something unfamiliar stirring, possibility. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his office, staring at the city below. He had not arranged the interview directly. That line, he refused to cross. Instead, he had made a single, quiet call, asking a colleague to look at a resume with fresh eyes. No names, no pressure. If Claire succeeded, it would be because she earned it. That was the line he clung to. The distance between them stretched. Weeks passed. Claire started the new job. It was not glamorous, but it was honest work. She began to rebuild routines, to feel like herself again. Still, on certain evenings, when the city lights blurred into memory, she wondered. Alexander watched from afar, fighting an urge that grew stronger with every day, to explain, to confess. to risk losing her respect for the chance of something real, but he hesitated, because once the truth was spoken, there would be no going back. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Reed was afraid that honesty might cost him the one connection that had not asked him to be anything other than human. The reveal came on a day that began like any other. Claire arrived early to work, coffee in hand, mind focused on the presentation she had been preparing all week. The nonprofit consulting firm had invited a major donor to visit, someone whose support could determine the future of several community projects. The office buzzed with quiet tension, voices lower than usual, movements careful. No one said his name out loud at first. When the elevator doors opened, the room seemed to inhale at once. Claire looked up instinctively, then froze. He walked in, surrounded by executives in tailored suits, posture composed, presence unmistakable. The same calm eyes, the same voice she remembered in the dark, steady and unassuming. Only now, everything about him spoke a different language. Power. Alexander Reed, someone whispered behind her. Chief Executive Officer of Reed Global. The words did not register immediately. Her mind rejected them, searching for a mistake, a coincidence, anything to explain what she was seeing, but there was no mistake. He turned, and their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, the world narrowed to that look. Recognition, guilt, something like fear. Claire's chest tightened. Her coffee cup slipped slightly in her hand. This was not possible. The man who had sat on her couch, who had listened without judgment, who had told her she was not invisible, was standing 10 feet away, introduced as a billionaire whose name she had seen on headlines in business magazines. The room erupted in polite applause as he was welcomed, but the sound felt distant, muffled, like she was underwater. He spoke, thanking the team, praising their work. His voice carried the same calm she remembered. That only made it worse. Every word felt like a betrayal. Her thoughts raced. Had the interview been real? The job? The note on the counter? Or had all of it been part of some elaborate lie she never agreed to be part of? She stood abruptly. The movement caught his attention again. His expression shifted, barely, but she saw it. He knew this moment was coming. He had simply hoped it would not happen like this. Claire did not wait for the presentation to end. She stepped out into the hallway, breath shallow, hands shaking. The walls felt too close, the floor too unsteady. A few moments later, footsteps followed. "Claire," he said softly. She turned on him, eyes sharp with disbelief and hurt. "Do not," she said. "Do not say my name like you have the right to." Alexander stopped a few feet away, respecting the boundary even now. "I wanted to tell you." "When?" she demanded. "After you decided how much truth I could handle?" Silence stretched between them, heavy and unforgiving. "You let me talk about my life," she continued, voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. "You let me believe that Knight was honest, that you were honest." "I was," he said quietly, "about how I felt, about listening, about you." She laughed, sharp and hollow. "You were an escort because you chose to be. I was there because I did not know who you were. Do you understand the difference?" He nodded once. Every day since, her anger trembled, giving way to something more painful. "You knew I was struggling. You knew I needed something real. And you still hid." "I hid because I did not want money to touch it," he said. "Because the moment you knew, everything would change, too." "And you decided that for me," she replied. That landed harder than any accusation. People passed by at the far end of the hallway, unaware of the reckoning unfolding. Claire felt exposed, foolish, angry at herself for trusting someone who had never truly been vulnerable in return. "I cannot do this," she said finally. "I cannot be someone's experiment." Alexander's chest tightened. "You were never that. But I did not get to choose," she said, stepping back. "And that matters." She turned and walked away, each step steady despite the fracture spreading through her chest. Alexander watched her go, knowing the reveal he had feared had not only arrived, but had taken with it the fragile trust he had spent a lifetime trying to earn. And for the first time, the cost of hiding felt heavier than any risk he had ever taken. The days after the confrontation passed slowly, weighted with silence. Claire threw herself into work, arriving early and leaving late, grateful for the structure it forced on her thoughts. She avoided the elevator where she had seen him last. She avoided headlines. She avoided anything that might pull her back into a moment she was not ready to relive. Anger was easier than disappointment. It gave her something solid to stand on. But late at night, when the city quieted and the apartment felt too still, the questions returned. Not about his wealth, not about the lie itself, but about why the truth had hurt as much as it did. Across the city, Alexander Reed faced a reckoning he could not delegate. He canceled meetings he would never have canceled before. He declined interviews. When his advisors asked why, he dismissed them with a wave of his hand. None of them understood what was at stake. For the first time, money was useless. He replayed her words again and again. "You decided that for me." She was right. So he did the only thing he had never tried before. He stopped controlling the outcome. At the next board meeting, in a room filled with people who usually hung on his every word, Alexander made an announcement that left them stunned. He disclosed that he had been operating under false pretenses during a period of personal leave. He took responsibility for crossing ethical lines, without names, without excuses. Then he stepped back. He appointed an interim leader. He removed himself from public-facing roles. The headlines speculated wildly, but he did not correct them. For once, reputation did not matter more than accountability. A week later, Claire was called into her supervisor's office. She tensed immediately, old fears resurfacing. Instead, her supervisor smiled. "We received a grant," she said. "An unrestricted one. No conditions. No branding. Just support. It secures our programs for the next 3 years." Claire blinked. "From who?" The supervisor shook her head. "Anonymous." Claire knew. That night, her phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for the chance to apologize in person. If you say no, I will respect that. No signature. No pressure." She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed one word. "Tomorrow." They met in a public park just after sunset, neutral ground. Alexander arrived alone, dressed simply, no trace of the man she had seen in the office hallway weeks earlier. He did not sit until she did. "I am sorry," he said without preamble. "Not for who I am, but for taking away your choice." She watched him carefully. "Do not explain it away." "I am not," he said. "I thought hiding protected something real. I was wrong. I protected myself." The admission settled between them. "I stepped back," he continued, "from my company, from the power that made me think I knew better. I will not contact you again after this, unless you ask me to." Claire felt the familiar instinct to guard herself rise, then pause. "You did not use money to fix this," she said quietly. "No," he replied. "I learned that would only make it worse." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I am not ready to trust you," she said, "but I see that you are trying to be honest now." Alexander nodded. "That is all I can offer. You." They sat in silence, the city humming softly around them. For the first time since the truth came out, the ground beneath Claire felt less unsteady, not healed, but possible. The weeks that followed unfolded gently, without grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Claire and Alexander did not rush to define what they were rebuilding. They met occasionally, always in ordinary places. Coffee shops with chipped mugs, park benches warmed by afternoon sun, conversations that began cautiously and ended honestly. Trust did not return all at once. It came in fragments. Claire noticed it in the way Alexander listened now, not with quiet intensity, but with openness. He answered questions he once avoided. He spoke about his failures without softening the edges. When she asked about the company, he did not hide behind titles. He spoke like a man learning how to stand without armor. For her part, Claire allowed herself to speak freely again. About her work, about the nights she still felt unsure, about the fear that trusting someone powerful meant losing herself. Alexander never argued with her fear. He accepted it. That was what changed everything. One evening, as they walked along the river, the city lights reflecting in slow ripples, Claire stopped and faced him. "I need to know something," she said. "If I had never found out who you were that day at the office, would you have told me?" He did not hesitate. "Yes, I was just afraid I would lose you when I did." She nodded. "You almost did." "I know," he said, "and I would have deserved that." Silence settled between them, but it was not heavy. "I am not interested in a life where I disappear into someone else's shadow," she said. "You never would," he replied. "Not with me." Months later, Claire stood in front of a room filled with community leaders, presenting a program she had helped design. It was her idea, born from the same empathy that once led her to believe she was invisible. Alexander sat in the back, unannounced, applauding with everyone else, never once drawing attention to himself. Afterward, he waited outside. "You were incredible," he said. She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. "I know." That night, back in her apartment, the same one that had witnessed the beginning of everything, Claire found the folded note again, the first one he had left. She held it for a moment, then set it down beside a new one he had written that evening. This one had a name. Weeks later, standing in that same room, Alexander took a breath. "I am not asking you to forget what happened," he said. "I am asking you to choose what happens next. With me. As equals." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "Promise me one thing," she said. "Anything. Never take my choice away again." He nodded. "I promise." She reached for his hand, steady and sure. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet commitment made within those walls. No headlines followed. No cameras waited. Just two people who had learned, in the hardest way, that love built on truth was not loud or dramatic. It was intentional. And for the first time, both of them stepped forward not as a billionaire or a woman trying to survive, but simply as themselves, choosing honesty over fear, and each other over everything else.